Have you ever been ignored so completely that it felt like the person wasn't just refusing to speak to you, but refusing to acknowledge your existence? If you've ever experienced this kind of silence, you know it isn't peaceful. It's weaponized. This is the beginning of what many people don't realize is one of the most painful emotional tactics used by narcissistic personalities: the silent treatment. In this chapter, we're going to peel back the first layer of this behavior, not to shame, not to judge, but to understand. Because before you can heal from the silent treatment, you need to understand what it really is and why it affects you the way it does. The silent treatment isn't about silence, it's about control. When someone with narcissistic traits goes silent, it's rarely because they're overwhelmed or need space. It's not the healthy silence that helps people cool down and think. Instead, this silence has a purpose: to make you feel uncertain, desperate, guilty, or afraid. Their silence says things they won't say out loud. You upset me, and now you need to fix it. You don't get access to me until you behave the way I want. Your reality depends on my approval. It's not a pause, it's a punishment. Why does it hurt so much? Because humans aren't meant to be socially erased. When someone ignores you on purpose, your brain interprets it as a threat. Your nervous system goes into high alert. You feel anxious, confused, and unsafe. Research shows that rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. That's why silent treatment feels like being emotionally stabbed, but with no visible wound. And narcissistic individuals know this. They use silence because it works. It destabilizes you. It makes you question yourself. And most importantly, it keeps you chasing their approval. The trap you don't notice yourself falling into: here's the subtle part. During the silent treatment, you might find yourself working harder to reconnect. You apologize. You explain. You overthink. You beg for clarity. You take the blame even when you didn't do anything wrong. You're not doing this because you're weak. You're doing it because the silent treatment creates a fear of disconnection that triggers your attachment system. Your brain thinks something is dangerously wrong, and it tries to restore harmony. But the moment you chase them, the narcissistic person feels powerful again. They've regained control. The hidden truth about this silence: most people think the silent treatment is just someone being stubborn or dramatic. But emotionally, psychologically, it goes much deeper. It's a way of saying, I control the connection. I decide when you feel safe. Your feelings depend on me. And that's what makes the silent treatment so destructive. The silent treatment isn't just someone needing space. It's a psychological tactic, one rooted in control, self-protection, and emotional immaturity. And to truly understand its impact, we first have to understand why narcissists use it in the first place. When a narcissist feels criticized, exposed, or challenged, even by something small, they experience what psychologists call a narcissistic injury. This isn't a normal feeling of embarrassment or discomfort. To them, it feels like an attack on their entire identity. A narcissist's self-esteem is fragile. They appear confident, but internally they depend heavily on external validation. So when you question their behavior, or set a boundary, or simply express an emotion they don't want to deal with, they shut down. Not because they're calm, but because they're overwhelmed. Silence becomes their shield. Why silence? Why not just talk? Because communication requires vulnerability. It requires accountability. It requires admitting they may have contributed to the problem. Narcissists struggle with all three, so instead of engaging, they retreat into silence. A silence designed to punish you for disrupting their self-image, regain control of the emotional situation, avoid responsibility for their actions, reassert power by making you chase them. In their mind, whoever breaks the silence first is the one who loses. It's a power game, one they have likely played many times before. The hidden manipulation behind it. The narcissistic silent treatment is almost never about reflection or emotional regulation. It's about shifting the emotional burden onto you. While they remain silent, you experience anxiety, guilt, self-doubt, confusion, a desperate need to fix things. This is intentional. The longer they stay silent, the more you question yourself. And eventually, most people give in, Not because they were wrong, but because the discomfort becomes unbearable. And the narcissist learns, silence works. I get what I want. This is why it's so draining. The silent treatment forces your nervous system into a state of hypervigilance. You're trying to interpret every moment, every expression, every pause. It's emotional labor the narcissist never reciprocates. And when they finally speak again, it's often as if nothing happened. You're left with emotional whiplash, and they walk away with more control. When someone gives you the silent treatment, it might feel like they're simply cooling off. But in many narcissistic dynamics, the silence isn't a pause, it's a strategy. And in this chapter, we're going to explore the hidden purpose behind the narcissist's silence, what they're really trying to achieve, why they choose silence instead of communication, and how this tactic keeps you emotionally hooked without you even realizing it. Let's take it slow. Think for a moment about what silence normally means in a healthy relationship. It might mean someone needs time to think. Someone is overwhelmed. Someone doesn't want to say something they'll regret. But with a narcissist, its silence is something entirely different. It's less about emotions and more about influence. The silent treatment becomes a tool to shape your behavior. They know the silence hurts you. They know the gap leaves you spiraling, worrying, replaying every detail. And they count on that because while you're overthinking, questioning yourself, apologizing for things you didn't even do, they're gaining power. Narcissistic silence serves three major purposes. One, to punish you for breaking their rules. Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you said no. Maybe you didn't give them the admiration they wanted. The silence becomes a form of emotional punishment. You didn't give me what I wanted, so now I will remove myself. It's not about resolving the conflict. It's about teaching you to avoid upsetting them next time. Two, to force you into chasing them. The silence creates anxiety. That anxiety pushes you to reach out. And when you reach out first, even if you weren't wrong, they win. This makes you the one who apologizes, fixes things, tries harder, blames yourself. You slowly start equating peace with not upsetting them. And that's exactly the dynamic they want. Three, to maintain control of the narrative. When they stop talking, it stops the conversation entirely. It shuts down your feelings, your perspective, and your reality. They decide when communication resumes. They decide how the issue is reframed. They decide what the story becomes. And by the time they return, you're often so relieved that you let their version of events override your own. The silence wasn't random, it was preparation. But perhaps the most damaging part is this. During the silence, you fill in the emotional gaps. You imagine they're hurting. You imagine they're set. You imagine you were too harsh. You create a narrative that protects them and blames yourself. And this is how the narcissistic silent treatment keeps you emotionally tied to someone who gives you nothing in return. But the truth is this, their silence isn't about their pain. It's about your compliance. The narcissistic silent treatment isn't just being ignored. It's a psychological tactic designed to create confusion, insecurity, and emotional dependence. And in this chapter, we'll break down why it cuts so deeply, even more than direct conflict. One, silence creates an emotional vacuum. Humans are wired to seek connection, clarity, and communication. When someone suddenly withdraws without explanation, your mind tries to fill in the blanks. You replay conversations, wonder what you did wrong, and search for a reason that doesn't exist. The narcissist knows this. Silence forces you to chase answers, and often to chase them. It hands them emotional control without ever lifting a finger. Two, silence triggers deep childhood wounds. For many people, being ignored touches something older and deeper, the fear of being abandoned, rejected, or unseen. If you grew up around emotional unpredictability, parents who shut down, withdrew affection, or used silence as punishment, the narcissist's silent treatment hits the same painful place. It feels familiar, it feels personal, and it feels like your fault, even though it isn't. Three, silence is a form of emotional withholding. Unlike a healthy timeout or a moment to cool off, the narcissistic silent treatment is strategic. It sends a message without speaking. Your feelings don't matter. I decide when we talk. You don't get access to me unless you behave the way I want. It's not conflict resolution. It's power. By withholding communication, attention, affection, and emotional presence, they place you in a position where you feel responsible for repairing the relationship, even though they're the one causing the damage. 4. Silence blocks closure and creates anxiety. Words can be argued with, words can be clarified, but silence leaves everything unanswered. You start imagining worst-case scenarios. Your emotional system stays activated, seeking closure that will never come. That prolonged state of uncertainty is what makes the silent treatment feel like psychological warfare. The goal isn't resolution. The goal is control through chaos. 5. Silence fades your sense of self. The longer you're subjected to silent treatment, the more you begin to question your own emotions, memories, and reactions. Am I overreacting? Maybe I am the problem. I just want things to go back to normal. This self-doubt slowly erodes your identity, and the narcissist's swag counts on that erosion. Because the weaker your sense of self becomes, the easier it is for them to shape you into what they want. 6. The pain is real, not overreaction. If you've ever felt broken, anxious, or emotionally drained from being ignored, understand this clearly. You're not too sensitive. You're responding to emotional deprivation, one of the most damaging forms of psychological manipulation. If you've ever been trapped in the cycle of the narcissistic silent treatment, you already know how emotionally draining it can feel. The confusion, the anxiety, the constant overthinking, and that deep fear that maybe you did something wrong. But here's the truth. Breaking free is not only possible, it's the most powerful step you can take toward healing. And in this final chapter, I want to guide you slowly, clearly, and compassionately through the steps that help you reclaim your confidence, clarity, and inner peace. Let's begin. The first step is recognition. You must clearly understand that the silent treatment is not a reflection of your value. It's a manipulation tactic rooted in their insecurity, their need for control, and their inability to handle emotional discomfort. Recognizing this truth removes the shame that keeps you trapped. You stop internalizing their silence and start seeing it for what it is: emotional misuse. The second step is emotional detachment. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means refusing to tie your sense of worth to someone else's moods. When they withdraw, you stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop begging for clarity. Instead, you shift the focus inward. Ask yourself, what do I need right now? How can I protect my peace? This shift, away from their emotions and back toward your own, breaks the psychological power of the silent treatment. Step 3 is establishing boundaries. Boundaries don't need to be loud. They don't need to be dramatic. They simply need to be firm. A boundary can be, I'm open to discussing this when you're ready to communicate respectfully. And then you hold that line. When you stop rewarding the silent treatment with attention, guilt, or panic, it loses its effectiveness. Narcissistic patterns weaken when they no longer get the reaction they expect. The fourth step is rebuilding your internal narrative, because the silent treatment does something very dangerous. It distorts how you see yourself. It makes you feel unworthy. It makes you feel disposable. It makes you feel responsible for someone else's emotional immaturity. To break free, you begin rewriting the story. I deserve communication. My feelings matter. I am allowed to walk away from people who harm my peace. These affirmations aren't cliches. They're counterweights, slowly undoing the damage caused by years of manipulation. The fifth step is reconnecting with your support system and yourself. Talk to people who validate your experiences. Spend time in environments where you feel seen, heard, and understood. Rebuild the parts of yourself that went quiet just to keep the peace. When you strengthen your internal world, the narcissist's silence no longer shakes you. And finally, the most important step, choose peace over chaos. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone deserves the power to disrupt your emotions. Not everyone deserves a seat at your table. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, I choose myself. And that choice is the beginning of freedom.